I'm gonna bring it kind of towards some current events in terms of like we just went through an election. Hopefully we'll have a peaceful change of power, and I think with all that's happened over the last year, and that's kind of been exposed in the conversations that have been happening that need to continue. How would you advise us as citizens, no matter where, what walk of life you're in, to kind of continue this pursuit of social and racial justice in America? And I say that in terms of, we don't have, loud protests, every week. We don't have the news coverage as much as we might like to. But I think we all have a voice and a platform, and whether that's, through social media, whether that's through our families, our workplaces, what have you. How would you advise us, going into 2021 to continue these important conversations that we need to have, to not, lose the momentum that I think we've gained over this last year, no matter how hard, some of these things have happened?
Well, look, it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about, and I write in the book about how after my election, and I saw this coming and I was worried about it, I think there were a lot of people who felt like, whoo, we're done.
Right.
Barack's in office now, change is here. And we had a big financial crisis, and we had 2 wars, and you had a big chunk of the Republican Party that were going to refuse to work with me. And, so no one event like an election settles things. Democracy is this constant process, and you're never done. And so I was really, I felt so optimistic this summer after the tragedy, as heartbroken as I was, to see the response to George Floyd. I was, we talked about how proud I was of how young people engaged, got involved, people from all walks of life. How proud I was of you and some of the other high-profile athletes who, were very clear in their convictions and expressed them in ways that, didn't leave any doubt in terms of the demands of justice, and then translated that into actually voting and, really specific organizational efforts. But you're absolutely right to now say, okay, what's the next step? Well, number one, I hope people know just right away, anybody who's listening in Georgia, there's another election coming up, a special, the runoff election after the Senate election. You've got 2 seats at stake in Georgia. Mm-hmm. And man, that's important because that'll determine who is in charge of the Senate. Mm-hmm. And anything that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want to do has to go through Congress. It has to go through the Senate. And if we are able to win those 2 seats with people who want to pursue voting rights legislation or criminal justice reform legislation, that is important. So pay attention to that. Make sure you're registered and make sure you vote. The other thing that I've spoken about a lot, and you're absolutely right to say everybody can be involved in this, is so much of the change people aspire to after the George Floyd tragedy happens at the local level and not the federal level. And so the mayor of cities appoints typically the police chief. There may be an elected school board and they have meetings. There are negotiations between the police and City Hall about what does their contract look like and how are police held or not held accountable. How are the district attorneys or state's attorneys approaching cases and how do they think about diversion, for example, of nonviolent drug offenses and treatment and education as opposed to incarceration. A lot of that stuff is happening at the local level. And that's where just a pretty small number of individuals, or, a
Mm-hmm.
group of churches, or a coalition of young people can have an impact. It's harder sometimes to affect what happens in Washington, but in your local community, you can actually show up at these meetings and ask questions and promote this kind of work. And one of the things that we're doing with My Brother's Keeper, which you and Aisha supported, our goal, and we started after the Trayvon Martin death as a response to make sure that we're getting to some of the root causes of racism and structural injustice. One of the things that a lot of these MBK communities have focused on is putting together handbooks and manuals and training programs and policy recommendations for cities. And in some cases, we've asked, one of the things that we did after the George Floyd murder was to insist on cities taking a pledge that they were going to move this process forward. And hundreds of cities have actually signed up. And so that's one way, if people are looking for ways to plug in, they can go to Obama.org, sign up to see if there's a My Brother's Keeper community in their area. If not, you can start one, but that's a place where you can immediately start getting information about concrete actions we can take to reform and improve the system.